I read Daniel Greene's favorite series and fell in love with fantasy, but I also discovered that Daniel Greene, he loves some books that I really don't love. Now, around 3 years ago, Daniel Greene released a video called Top 10 Fantasy Series. And in that point of my life, Library of Viking didn't even exist. I wasn't really reading much. And to say that Daniel Greene was one of the biggest impacts on my life when it came to getting back into reading, then that is definitely not an understatement. So I recently went back and watched this video and discovered that I have now read basically every single series Daniel Greene has recommended, either the first book or the whole series, except two. And he mentions 16 series in this video. So I thought it'd be fun to go back and watch this video, which has basically had a massive influence on my reading taste for the past 3 years, and give my thoughts on whether I agree with Daniel Greene or not, and whether I think they are good recommendations or not. And also, Daniel Greene, if you're watching this, thank you so much for the positive influence you've had on my life. Library of a Viking probably wouldn't exist without you. So Daniel Greene basically has 5 honorable mentions, and then he has 11 on his top 10 series list. So let's get into it.
And kick off this top 10 list with a little bit of honorable mentions. We have Wizard of Earthsea.
Alright, so I have read A Wizard of Earthsea, the first book in the Earthsea cycle, and it's one of those books that I feel like I need to go back and reread, because I really struggled with Ursula Le Guin's prose. I mean, it was just way too descriptive. And for some reason, like, I first read it in physical format and I just couldn't get into it. And then I read it on audio and that was even worse. And I know everyone praises Le Guin because she's a legend in the genre, but A Wizard of Earthsea, I just could not get into it. I read the first book, I didn't continue, but people keep praising Le Guin for being this genius, and I know she is an icon of the genre, so I feel like I need to go back. But unfortunately, when it comes to A Wizard of Earthsea, at least in this point of time, it's not a book I would have recommended. Alright, let's move on.
Up next, we have one that's probably going to be shockingly low for some people, and that is Discworld.
Okay, this is so interesting because this list is from 3 years ago, and I'm pretty sure that he has since put Discworld way higher, and I think now he calls it one of his favorite series, maybe top 1 or 2. So it's very interesting to see it in his honorable mentions, but I have read 4 or 5 books by Terry Pratchett, and I've only really loved Mort. All the other books have been very meh. Now, while Terry Pratchett is an absolute genius, I mean, his ability to analyze complex themes in an absurdist fantasy setting is just unrivaled, and he is very humorous, but I've just come to discover that I don't enjoy humorous and absurdist fantasy books, and Discworld is way too absurd for my taste. So once again, Earthsea, Discworld, not really series that I have enjoyed. Well, let's move on.
Now on our next one, we have a Napoleonic fantasy that I've had quite a few people pick up on my recommendation, and almost all of them have thoroughly enjoyed it, and that would be Powder Mage.
Alright, so I read A Promise of Blood, the first book in the Powder Mage trilogy, 2 weeks ago, and it is potentially one of my favorite books of this year. I absolutely loved it. It was brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. I was a bit worried in the first 20% or so if it's just going to be a typical revolution kind of story, but Brian McClellan, like, the pacing is spot on. He constantly adds new layers to the plot. It's a chef's kiss. I absolutely love the first book, and I'll definitely be continuing the series. So this great recommendation, highly recommend the Powder Mage trilogy.
This next honorable mention is, and that's The Dark Tower.
The Dark Tower, I probably also got into the series because of Daniel Greene, and if you know me, then I would probably rank this potentially as my all-time favorite series. I would definitely not put in honorable mentions. It would definitely be in my top 10 and probably in my top 3, maybe top 1 even. Love the series, absolutely to death. It was one of the first series I read when I got back into fantasy, and it just opened my eyes to how innovative and how fresh and how unique fantasy can be, because this is like definitely not your typical Middle-earth farm boy to hero kind of fantasy. It is just so different. It has time traveling, it's western, it's horror, it's epic fantasy, and it's just absolutely crazy and wild. So I'm glad to see that the series is on his list. I would definitely have put it way up. Alrighty, he has one more series on his honorable mentions.
It's Lightbringer.
Alright, this is one of the very few series I actually haven't even touched, and that's just because most people I trust say book 4 and 5 just didn't hit the mark for them, but it's kind of still on my TBR. But this is one of the very few series out of all the ones he's recommended that I haven't picked up yet. Alright, let's move into his top 10. Now, if you enjoy watching BookTube, which I'm sure you do since you are watching this video, then you might have considered starting your own booktube channel, but might find it a bit overwhelming on figuring out where to start, what to do, and so on and so on. Well, if you want to potentially start your own YouTube channel, or even just gain some basic understanding on, for example, how to video edit, then there is a way, which leads me to today's sponsor, Skillshare. Now, Skillshare is an online learning community with thousands of online classes and members, and it's truly a place to get inspired, learn new skills, and put them to work in impactful ways. Now, what really makes Skillshare so unique is the fact that it has the largest online learning community for creatives with a massive depth and breadth covering topics such as illustration, graphic design, marketing, video editing, and also has creative career focused classes and so much more. And what I love is that Skillshare has a learn by doing approach, which I really appreciate. Now, for my video editing, I use DaVinci Resolve, an incredible free software, and Skillshare really helped me to learn how to use the software. Now, Skillshare has so many different tutorials on how to use DaVinci, but one class I found really helpful was the one that called Video Editing in DaVinci Resolve 18, a complete beginner's guide by Addy Singh, which basically covers all the basic steps in a step-by-step manner, so I would highly recommend it. Now, there is a link in the description down below where the first 500 people that use the link will get 1 month free trial of Skillshare. So if you want to kickstart your booktube career, or learn how to video edit, or just gain a new skill, then please go and check the link in the description down below. Thank you so much for Skillshare for sponsoring this video. Now let's continue.
Go ahead and jump on into the actual top 10 list. But at number 10, and that's going to be The Band, or more specifically Kings of the Wild Bloody Rose by Nicholas Ames.
It is so interesting to see a person that has such a big influence on your life, and now seeing how much I disagree with almost every single series he has recommended so far. I read The Kings of the Wild last month, and it is one of my least favorite books I read, and I kind of expected it to be one of my least favorite books. I only read it because it was my Patreon pick, so we read it in the Viking book club, and yeah, it is fun. I mean, I'm not surprised to see this book on this list, because Daniel Greene loves Discworld, and Kings of the Wild and Discworld both have this swashbuckling or absurdist humor, but those types of books just don't work for me, so yeah, this would not go anywhere near my top 10.
But let's go ahead and move on to number 9. But The Witcher series, still in my top 10.
Alright, online spot, he put The Witcher, also a series I got into because of Daniel Greene. I read The Last Wish, which is the first book in the series, and I did not enjoy it. I mean, the first book is a short story collection, so some people say the novels are better. A lot of people say the short stories are the best. I haven't played the games, I haven't watched the series, but I don't know if it was something with the translation or something, but I just could not get into The Witcher. I mean, didn't connect with the characters. I think the world building was interesting, but man, I did not enjoy The Witcher, which is again crazy. Another series that Daniel Greene loves that I wouldn't really recommend.
At number 8, yes, Gentlemen Bastards.
I've only read the first book, The Lies of Locke. It's one of my favorite books of all time. I will definitely be reading the other 2 books, but I'm kind of hoping for the 4th book to be announced or giving a release date before I pick the other 2 books. But yeah, Lies of Locke was my favorite book of last year. Amazing heist, incredible writing style, underdog. It's just, it has everything I love in a fantasy. So Daniel Greene, this is a very, very good recommendation, and definitely one that deserves to be in top 10. Even though I only read the first book, it is so good.
At number 7, it's going to be A Song of Ice and Fire.
Alright, I read the first 2 books in A Song of Ice and Fire. I really enjoyed them, but I think I just wasn't in the right time in my life when I picked these up, because I just never really continued, even though I enjoyed the writing style, I love the scale, and I also think the fact that the series is unfinished, and when I read it, last season came out, and most people hated that. I mean, I didn't even watch the show, which I know is a big shock. So I can't really put A Song of Ice and Fire in my top 10, just because it's been ages, and I never really continued, just because I think, as I mentioned, my life situation was in a weird place at that point. But I'm fairly certain that if I picked up A Song of Ice and Fire now and read the first 5 books, I would most likely put it in my top 10, maybe even top 5, because that series has all the elements I love in a series. So I'll definitely get back to A Song of Ice and Fire one day, and I'm expecting to put it in top 10. So overall, I think this is a good recommendation.
At number 6, we have First Law.
Interesting. So First Law is definitely the series I would put in my top 10. Thank you so much, Daniel, for recommending the First Law. I own all of the books behind me, signed. I love the series. I actually haven't read Red Country or Sharptooth yet, but I read the other 8 books, and Age of Madness especially, and The Heroes. Incredible books, especially Age of Madness. That is one of my favorite series of all time. If I was to split the First Law universe into series, I would definitely say Age of Madness is my favorite, and that would firmly go into my top 10. First Law maybe would be on like 11th spot or something. But yeah, just amazing writing style, incredible characterizations, and not as heavy on the world building as a lot of other series. But yeah, I mean, Joe Abercrombie, he is just a legend. He knows how to write grimdark and also add a tiny bit of humor just to make the overall story bearable. So this is a very, very good recommendation again. But watching this video, it just surprises me how many of these recommendations I haven't really enjoyed as much as Daniel Greene, but I think that just showcases how I have discovered my own like reading taste. So even though I haven't loved all of these series, I'm so appreciative of this video.
At number 5, The Poppy War.
Yeah, this is very interesting. I'm wondering now, because this video is 3 years old, if he made a list now, I don't think he would put the Poppy War in the top 5. I wonder if he would even put it in the top 10. Like, I really enjoyed the Poppy War. I have them behind me here, and I've even met Rebecca Kwong in real life. I'm a huge fan. Also, Babel, which I think is better than the Poppy War. The Poppy War is brilliant. I love the trilogy, and I would definitely put it in my honorable mentions. Potentially, it would maybe be on the 10th spot, but I'm very surprised to see Daniel Greene put this book and series this high. But this was 3 years ago, so I'm sure he would probably change his mind. But this is a very solid recommendation. And I also think that since I was very new to fantasy, this was such a great recommendation when I was like trying to get into fantasy and stuff like that. Just to see like an Asian-inspired setting, seeing another take on grimdark, seeing an underdog. Even though I'm surprised this is on 5th spot, I think this is a very solid recommendation.
At number 4, surprising nobody who's been paying attention to the channel over the last however many months, is Book of the Ancestor.
All right, I actually haven't read this series, but since I knew Daniel Greene was such a big fan of Mark Lawrence, for some reason I wanted to save the best for last. So I read One Word Kill, I read The Book That Wouldn't Burn, I read Prince of Thorns, so I read 3 other books by Mark Lawrence, and I haven't really enjoyed any of them. I've given all of them 3 stars. So it's not a bad rating, but it's not an amazing rating either. I'm pretty sure the Book of the Ancestor I will probably enjoy, but since I read 3 other books by Mark Lawrence due to Daniel Greene, I'm just not sure when I'll get to this series now, and I'm also unsure if he would rank this series as highly now. So yeah, watching this video is really eye-opening because it really feels like both my taste and Daniel Greene's taste has changed so much in the past 3 years.
Number 3, we have the Glow Up. It's the Dresden Files.
Okay, the Dresden Files. So I think Brent Weeks and Jim Butcher are the only authors I haven't read any books by on this series. All the other ones mentioned I have read, but as I've discovered more and more about my reading taste, I've become more and more confident that this series is probably not a series I will enjoy, but it is firmly on my TBR. But let's move on to the next one.
And now at number 2, I'm going to cheat a little bit, but I feel like people are going to have a problem with this. At number 2, I'm going to put the Cosmere.
He even mentioned it. Some people wouldn't group it together. Some will say Stormlight Archive, Mistborn, and so on. The Cosmere is definitely in my top 10 for sure. I'm a huge fan of Stormlight, huge fan of Mistborn. I even own all the letterbounds. I love the Cosmere, but I also found that there's some books I absolutely adore, Mistborn, Stormlight, and then there's other books that I've been more lukewarm on, like Tress of the Emerald Sea or Mistborn Era 2. Wasn't really a big fan, so I really feel like Cosmere is one of the series that has some of the highest of highs in fantasy, and the worst of the Cosmere is average. So I don't really think there's many bad books at all, and I definitely agree with Daniel Greene here. Cosmere is so good. All right, we're now getting to first spot, and he kind of has 2 series here. So
I will say, before I get in number 1 spot, I have a number 0 spot, which means the one above all, the king, the magnum opus, the one you could all see coming, and that's Wheel of Time. Yes, we're not going to get into it. Wheel of Time, 0, number 1, greatest, perfection. Anyway, let's go with number 1. Because we got 0 out of the way. Number 1, we have Lord of the Rings.
On his first spot, he has Lord of the Rings, and on his top spot, he has the Wheel of Time series. I read both of these. I am a huge fan of both, but it's been so long since I read Lord of the Rings. It's been like 15 years. I definitely reread it, but I really enjoyed it when I read it, but I was like 14 when I read it. Just because it's been so long, I often feel bad putting Lord of the Rings in my top 10. Not because I loved it, you know, but it's just been so long since I read it, so definitely need to reread it, hopefully next year. And I have read the whole Wheel of Time solely because of Daniel Greene, and I have loved the series. He calls it perfection. Book 8 to 10 are, in my opinion, bad. But man, this is one of the first years I read when I got back into fantasy, and I can't emphasize enough how much of an impact the videos Daniel Greene had made about the Wheel of Time and just picking up the series had on me, and it's definitely a big reason why I today love fantasy. So just to wrap up, Earthsea, didn't really love. Discworld, didn't really love. Powder Mage, loved. Dark Tower, absolutely loved. Librarian, haven't read yet. Kings of the Wild, I did not love. Witcher, I did not love. Gentleman Bastards, loved. A Song of Ice and Fire, loved, but I really need to pick it up again. First Law, absolutely loved. The Poppy War, really great. Book of the Ancestors / Mark Lawrence, very mixed feelings. The Dresden Files, haven't picked it up yet. The Cosmere, loved. Lord of the Rings, loved. Wheel of the Time, absolutely loved. This was a really fun video to look back on because it's just crazy how big of an impact Daniel Greene has had on my reading taste. And even though there's been many series I haven't really loved that much, these recommendations have really allowed me to discover which books I love. So that's it. Thank you so much for watching.
Thank you so much for watching to the end of this video. Now, if you want to support what I do here, then I do have a Patreon. Now, a reason why I created a Patreon was to find a new way to reinvest to the channel, because basically since I created my Patreon, I spent around 100% of my earnings to hire an editor to do a couple of videos for me a month. Now, since creating my Patreon, an editor has done more than 20 videos for me on my channel, so it makes a huge difference. Now, if you join my Patreon, you will also get some benefits. For example, you'll get a name in my videos like these guys. You'll also be able to join the exclusive Viking book club where every month we read one book together, and you might be the one to put the book forward. This month we're reading this book. You also get to vote on my next read, get access to exclusive videos like a wrap up or even book reviews, and so much more. But this is totally voluntary, but all support is much appreciated.